I never thought I'd be the villain in my own family's story. At 68, after decades of hard work, sacrifice, and dedication to my family, I found myself painted as a senile old fool, a man whose trauma had warped his mind beyond reason. The whispers, the sidelong glances, the patronizing smiles. I saw it all, heard it all, felt it all like daggers in my aging heart. Why believe a traumatized old man? That's what my daughter-in-law, Melissa, whispered to my son at our Sunday dinner. She thought I couldn't hear her, but H hasn't dulled my hearing, just sharpened my awareness of the disrespect that had been growing around me like weeds in a neglected garden. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how my own family turned against me, how they plotted to take everything I'd built, and how I reclaimed not just my dignity but justice itself, we need to go back. Back to when I still believed family meant something sacred. My name is Harold Mitchell. I built Mitchell Construction from nothing but calloused hands and an unwavering work ethic. For 43 years, I poured concrete, framed houses, and eventually managed one of the most respected construction companies in Connecticut. Every splinter, every backache, every 16-hour day had a purpose: to build something lasting for my family. Margaret and I married young. She was 18, I was 20. We grew up together, really. Lived in a tiny apartment above a deli in Bridgeport where the smell of pastrami would seep through the floorboards. We saved every penny. I worked construction during the day and stocked shelves at night. Margaret waited tables and took night classes to become a nurse. We weren't just building a life, we were laying a foundation, brick by brick. Our son, James, came along when we were 25. Margaret nearly died during childbirth complications that would prevent us from having more children. It didn't matter. James became our world. Everything we did, every sacrifice we made, was for him. By the time James was ready for college, Mitchell Construction had grown into a multi-million-dollar business. I employed 37 people, good people with families of their own. We'd moved from that tiny apartment to a beautiful colonial in Fairfield County. We paid for James's education at Boston University without a single student loan. Margaret and I would look at each other sometimes, amazed at how far we'd come from that apartment above the deli. When James brought Melissa home during his junior year, Margaret had reservations. "There's something calculating in her eyes, Harold," she told me privately. But I brushed it off. James was happy, and that's what mattered. Besides, Margaret had always been protective of our only son. They married 2 years after graduation. I gave them a generous down payment for their first home as a wedding gift. I brought James into the business, teaching him everything I knew about construction, about managing people, about building something that would last. I wanted him to take over someday, to continue what Margaret and I had started. When Margaret was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in 2017, our world shattered. She fought hard for 18 months, but cancer fights dirty. I held her hand as she slipped away on a cold February morning in 2019, just 3 months before our 50th anniversary. Something in me died with her that day. The world lost its color, food lost its taste, and for the first time in my life, I felt utterly lost. James and Melissa stepped up, I'll give them that. They invited me for dinner regularly. Their kids, my grandchildren, Emma and Tyler, would visit. Melissa would bring casseroles and check my medication. On the surface, they were the picture of dutiful children caring for a grieving father. I was grateful. In my darkest hours, they seemed to be the only light. I threw myself into work, expanding the business even further. We landed major contracts for commercial developments in Hartford and New Haven. The company valuation soared past $12 million. I updated my will, making James the primary beneficiary, with trusts set up for Emma and Tyler's education. I even put James's name on most of my accounts as a precaution, in case something happens to me, I told him. So you can handle things without hassle. Looking back, that's when things began to change, though I was too blind to see it. Too trusting. Too convinced that blood meant loyalty. The first incident that should have raised alarm bells happened about 6 months after Margaret passed. I was having dinner at James and Melissa's house, a weekly tradition by then. After the meal, I overheard a conversation while returning from the bathroom. They didn't know I was in the hallway. "Dad's lost without Mom," James was saying. "I'm worried about him running the company in his state." "He's grieving, not incompetent," Melissa replied. "But have you looked at the latest contracts? The Westport development alone is worth millions. If he'd just retire like he should, you'd have control of everything." "He'll never retire. Construction is his life. Everyone retires eventually. Or they become unable to manage things. Your father's almost 70. How long do you think he can keep going at this pace?" I stood frozen in that hallway, the words washing over me like ice water. I told myself I was misinterpreting things. That it was natural for James to be concerned about my well-being. That Melissa was just being practical. I cleared my throat loudly before returning to the dining room, and they greeted me with smiles that suddenly seemed plastered on. I dismissed my concerns and continued on. The company was thriving under my leadership. I was handling Margaret's death as well as anyone could expect. Yes, there were nights I'd sit alone in our bedroom and talk to her as if she were still there. Yes, I kept her clothes hanging in the closet, her perfume on the dresser. But I was functioning. I was still sharp, still the same businessman who had built Mitchell Construction from nothing. Or so I thought. The real trouble began when I declined an offer to sell the business to Landmark Development, a major player looking to expand into Connecticut. They offered $15 million, a fair price, even generous. But Mitchell Construction wasn't just a business to me. It was my legacy. It was what would keep Margaret's memory alive. It was what I planned to pass down to James, and eventually to Emma and Tyler. "Dad, you need to consider this offer seriously," James insisted when I told him I turned it down. We were in my office, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the blueprints spread over my desk. "There's nothing to consider," I replied. "This company isn't for sale." "But $15 million, Dad. Do you understand what that means? You could retire comfortably. We could all benefit." "Benefit? We're already benefiting. The company makes excellent profits, provides jobs for dozens of families, and will be yours someday. What more benefit do you need?" James ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so like his mother that it made my heart ache. "It's not that simple. Managing a construction company is different from having liquid assets. The market is unpredictable. Construction is always the first to feel an economic downturn. I've weathered 3 recessions with this company," I reminded him. "We'll weather the next one too." He sighed, that patronizing sound that had become increasingly common. "You're not thinking clearly about this. It's an emotional decision, not a rational one. Because business isn't just numbers, James. It's people. It's relationships. It's the legacy we leave behind." "Legacy," he muttered, almost under his breath. "Not everything has to be a monument, Dad." The conversation ended there, but the tension lingered. I started noticing other things after that. James questioning my decisions in front of employees. Melissa making comments about my forgetfulness when I'd misplace reading glasses or car keys, normal absent-mindedness that she framed as concerning memory lapses. The way they'd exchange glances when I talk about future projects or expansion plans. I tried to ignore it, to give them the benefit of the doubt. These were the people I loved most in the world, the only close family I had left. Surely, I was being paranoid, seeing shadows where there were none. Then came the incident with the medication. I've taken blood pressure medication for years, nothing serious, just standard maintenance for a man my age. One evening, after taking my usual pill, I felt strange. Dizzy, disoriented, my thoughts foggy. I barely made it to my bed before passing out. When I woke the next morning, I was confused, my memory of the previous evening hazy. It happened twice more over the next few weeks. Each time, the symptoms were the same: dizziness, confusion, memory gaps. I made an appointment with my doctor, concerned I might be having small strokes or the beginning of dementia, a fear that haunts many aging minds. Dr. Patel ran extensive tests, blood work, brain scans, cognitive assessments. Everything came back normal. "Your health is excellent for a man of your age, Harold," he assured me. "I don't see any signs of cognitive decline or neurological issues. But these episodes could be related to your blood pressure medication," he suggested. "Let me see the pills you're taking." I brought them to our next appointment. He examined them carefully. "These don't look right," he said finally. "The shape is similar, but these are not the lisinopril I prescribed you." He sent the pills to be analyzed. The results showed they contained a mixture of my prescribed medication and zolpidem, a sleep aid known to cause confusion, memory problems, and sedation. Someone had been tampering with my medication. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, the lab report clutched in my trembling hands, and faced the unthinkable question: who would do this to me? The answer came unwanted, unbidden, but undeniable. Only one person had access to my medication: Melissa. She organized my pills into a weekly dispenser every Sunday night to help you keep track, Harold, she'd said with that smile that now seemed sinister in retrospect. But why? The question tormented me as I drove home, my mind racing. Then, like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle finally connecting, I saw the pattern that had been forming around me. The whispered conversations. The questions about my competence. James's push for me to sell the company. The forgetfulness that Melissa kept pointing out to anyone who would listen. They wanted control. Control of the company, of my assets, of everything I'd built. And they were willing to manufacture evidence of mental decline to get it. I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands shaking too badly to drive. Tears burned my eyes, not of sadness, but of rage. Pure, clarifying rage. The kind that burns away confusion and leaves only crystal clear purpose. They had made a critical error in their calculations. They had underestimated me. They thought I was a doddering old man, weakened by grief and age. They thought wrong. Harold Mitchell hadn't built a multi-million-dollar company by being naive or easily manipulated. I'd survived backbreaking labor, ruthless competitors, economic downturns, and the soul-crushing loss of my beloved wife. I wouldn't be taken down by the betrayal of my own blood. Right there, on the shoulder of Route 8, I made a decision. I would find out exactly what they were planning. I would gather evidence. And I would make sure they faced consequences for their betrayal. The game was on. But they didn't know I was playing. My first step was to protect myself. I stopped taking any medication that passed through Melissa's hands. I bought a new supply directly from the pharmacy and kept it hidden in my workshop, a place neither James nor Melissa ever visited. I installed small cameras in my home, focused on my medicine cabinet, my home office, and the entranceways. Not illegal, it was my property, after all. I began keeping meticulous notes of every conversation, every incident of forgetfulness they claimed I had. I recorded conversations when legally possible. Connecticut is a one-party consent state, which worked in my favor. I needed allies, people I could trust. There weren't many. Margaret had been my confidant, my partner in everything. Without her, I felt adrift. But there were a few people who might help. The first was Linda Vasquez, my company's CFO. She'd been with Mitchell Construction for 22 years and had been Margaret's close friend. The second was Michael Chen, my attorney who had handled everything from business contracts to my personal will for decades. The third, surprisingly, was Emily Rodriguez, James and Melissa's housekeeper, who had always treated me with genuine respect and seemed to have her own reservations about Melissa. I approached Linda first, asking her to lunch at a small restaurant far from our usual spots. "Something's wrong, Harold," she said before I even brought it up. "I've noticed James making inquiries about company finances that seem unusual." "What kind of inquiries?" I asked, my suspicions deepening. "He wanted detailed valuations of all our properties, information about our liquid assets, copies of all our major contracts. When I asked why, he said you had asked him to get up to speed on everything. But you hadn't mentioned anything about it to me." I nodded slowly. "No, I hadn't. Because I never asked him to do that." Linda's expression grew serious. "There's more. He's been meeting with executives from Landmark Development, the company that tried to buy us out. Off the books, unofficial meetings." My heart sank. "He's trying to sell the company behind my back." "I think so," Linda confirmed. "But he can't do that without your signature. You're still the majority owner." "Unless I was deemed incompetent to manage my affairs," I said quietly. "If I were declared mentally unfit, who would become my legal guardian?" Understanding dawned on Linda's face. "James. Your only child. And as my guardian, he could make business decisions in my best interest," I continued. "Including selling Mitchell Construction." "Harold, are you saying—" "I believe my son and his wife are attempting to have me declared incompetent so they can take control of everything I built." Linda reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "What do you need from me?" "Documentation," I replied. "Every meeting James has with Landmark, every unusual request, every deviation from normal business practices. I need it all recorded and timestamped." "Consider it done," she promised. "No one messes with the man who gave me a chance when no one else would. Margaret would never forgive me if I let them do this to you." Michael Chen, my attorney, was equally supportive when I shared my concerns. "Your current will and power of attorney documents make James your decision maker if you're incapacitated," he confirmed, reviewing the files in his downtown Hartford office. "It's standard for an only child, but given what you're telling me, we should make immediate changes." "What do you recommend?" I asked. "First, we document your current mental competence. I'll arrange for independent psychological evaluations, multiple ones, from respected professionals with no connection to your family. We'll have the results notarized and filed. And then? Then we create a new power of attorney and healthcare directive naming someone other than James, perhaps Linda, since you trust her. We'll set up a trust for your assets with clear conditions that cannot be overridden even if someone were to challenge your competence later." "Can we do it without James finding out?" I asked. "I'm not ready to confront him yet. Not until I understand exactly what they're planning." Michael nodded. "Everything between us is confidential. He would have no legal right to this information." "There's one more thing," I said, hesitating. "I need to know if James or Melissa have already taken any legal steps. Have they filed anything with the courts, consulted with specialists in elder law, anything that would indicate they're moving forward with this plan?" "I can make some discreet inquiries," Michael assured me. "The legal community in Hartford isn't that large. Word gets around." My final ally came about unexpectedly. I was leaving James and Melissa's house after another tense Sunday dinner when Emily, their housekeeper, followed me to my car. "Mr. Mitchell," she said quietly, glancing back at the house to ensure no one was watching. "I think you should know something." "What is it, Emily?" "I've heard things while cleaning. Mrs. Mitchell, Melissa, she makes phone calls when she thinks no one is around. She's been talking to doctors, asking about cognitive assessments, about how to prove someone is not right in the head." My jaw tightened. "Recently?" 4 months now," Emily confirmed. "And there's more. Last week, I was cleaning their home office, and I found a document on the printer. It looked like a petition to the court. I didn't read all of it, but I saw your name. Thank you for telling me this, Emily, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Why are you helping me? She smiled sadly. My father worked for your company for 15 years. You paid for his medical bills when he got hurt, even though the insurance didn't cover everything. He always said you were a good man, a fair boss. I believe him. I appreciate your help, but this could put your job at risk. Some things are more important than a job, Mr. Mitchell. My father taught me that too. With my small but loyal team in place, I began gathering evidence systematically. Linda documented James's unauthorized meetings and questionable inquiries at the company. Michael confirmed that James had indeed consulted with an attorney specializing in guardianship cases and had requested information about involuntary psychiatric holds. Emily kept her eyes and ears open in the household, occasionally taking photos of documents with her phone when it was safe to do so. Meanwhile, I played my part. I acted exactly as they expected, a grieving widower struggling with aging, occasionally forgetful, increasingly withdrawn. I let them think their plan was working, that I was oblivious to their scheme. It was the hardest acting job of my life, sitting across from my son at dinner, looking into the eyes of the child I had raised, and pretending I didn't know he was betraying me. Every night, alone in the house that felt too empty without Margaret, I would review the evidence we were collecting, trying to understand the full scope of their plan. The picture that emerged was more calculated than I had initially feared. James and Melissa weren't just after the company. They wanted everything: my personal savings, investment accounts, the house, even the vintage Corvette I'd restored with my own hands as a retirement project. They had already contacted real estate agents about eventually listing my home. They had researched assisted living facilities over an hour away from any friends or connections I had. Their plan, as best I could reconstruct it, was to use the doctored medication to cause episodes of confusion, document these episodes as evidence of mental decline, file for emergency guardianship on the grounds that I was a danger to myself, and then use that guardianship to liquidate my assets for their benefit. The final piece came when Michael discovered, through his contacts, that James had already scheduled a meeting with Judge Robert Kensington, an old golfing buddy of Melissa's father, to discuss concerns about a family member's health decisions. They're making their move soon, Michael warned me during a secure call from a burner phone I'd purchased. Probably within the next 2 weeks. Then we need to move faster, I replied. It's time to set our trap. The plan we devised was simple but effective. I would call a family dinner at my home ostensibly to discuss my future plans. I would hint that I was finally considering retirement and the sale of the company, which would surely bring James and Melissa running. At this dinner, with witnesses present, everything would be revealed. I invited James and Melissa, of course, and my grandchildren. I also invited Linda from the company, Michael my attorney, Dr. Patel who had discovered the medication tampering, and 2 of my oldest friends from the industry. I told James it was because I wanted trusted advisors present for an important decision. The evening of the dinner arrived, a crisp October night that reminded me of the autumn evenings when James was a boy and we'd rake leaves together in the yard. Margaret would make hot apple cider, and we'd sit on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. How had we come from those golden memories to this moment of betrayal? I prepared the dining room carefully. At each place setting, I left a sealed envelope with the person's name on it. Inside was a detailed account of what I had discovered, with supporting evidence relevant to each person's role in the situation. No one was to open these until dinner was well underway. My hands trembled slightly as I made final preparations. Not from fear, but from the weight of what I was about to do. Was I really going to expose my only son as a would-be thief who had conspired against his own father? Was I prepared to tear apart what remained of my family? Margaret's voice seemed to whisper in my mind, "The truth matters, Harold. It always has." The doorbell rang at precisely 7 p.m. James and Melissa were always punctual, one of the few positive traits I could still acknowledge in them. Their children, Emma and Tyler, followed behind, already focused on their phones. At 16 and 14, they were good kids, largely untouched by their parents' scheming. I had made sure their trusts were ironclad and separate from anything James could access. "Dad," James greeted me with a hug that felt hollow now that I knew its falseness. "You look well." "I'm feeling much better these days," I replied, the first hint that things weren't as they assumed. Melissa kissed my cheek. "The house looks lovely, Harold. Have you been managing okay on your own?" "Oh, I managed just fine," I said with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Better than expected, actually." The others arrived shortly after: Linda, Michael, Dr. Patel, and my friends Tom and Steve from the industry. We gathered in the living room for drinks before dinner, making small talk that felt surreal given what was to come. "So, Dad," James said during a lull in the conversation, "you mentioned you wanted to discuss your future plans? Something about retirement?" I nodded slowly. "Yes, I've been doing a lot of thinking lately. About the company, about what happens next." "That's great," Melissa chimed in, too enthusiastically. "It's so important to plan ahead. Especially at your age." "My age," I repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, I suppose 68 is getting up there. Though men in my family tend to live well into their 90s. My father was still splitting firewood at 87. "Well, physical health is one thing," Melissa said carefully. "But cognitive health is another matter entirely. We've all noticed some concerning episodes lately." And there it was, the opening I'd been waiting for. She couldn't resist the opportunity to begin laying the groundwork, even here, in front of others. "Concerning episodes?" I asked innocently. "What do you mean?" James jumped in. "Dad, you know what she means. The confusion, the memory lapses. Last month, you couldn't remember where you parked at the grocery store. And you seemed very disoriented after taking your medication that night at our house," Melissa added. "Remember? We were worried you shouldn't be driving." I nodded thoughtfully. "Ah, yes, those episodes. Very concerning indeed. Dr. Patel, you've examined me recently. What did you conclude about my cognitive function?" Dr. Patel, a dignified man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair, straightened in his seat. "I found no evidence of cognitive impairment whatsoever, Mr. Mitchell. In fact, your test results show above average cognitive function for your age group." James's smile faltered. "Well, tests don't always capture the day-to-day reality." "And what about my medication?" I interrupted. "Dr. Patel, you analyzed the pills I was taking. What did you find?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Melissa's face had gone very still, her fingers tightening around her wineglass. "I found that someone had replaced some of your blood pressure medication with zolpidem, a sedative that can cause confusion, disorientation, and memory problems, especially in older adults," Dr. Patel stated clearly. It was a dangerous and potentially criminal act of medication tampering. All eyes turned to Melissa, whose face had drained of color. That's absurd," she stammered. "Why would anyone do that?" "An excellent question," I agreed. "Linda, would you mind sharing what you've observed at the company recently?" Linda straightened, her expression professional but her eyes hard as she looked at James. "I've documented multiple instances where James has sought unauthorized access to company financials, held secret meetings with Landmark Development about selling the company, and attempted to access Harold's personal accounts." James's face flushed dark red. "This is ridiculous. Dad asked me to look into company valuations. I was helping him." "I never asked you to do that, son," I said quietly. Just as I never asked Melissa to organize my medications, though she insisted on doing so. The room had grown tense, the air thick with unspoken accusations. My grandchildren looked confused and uncomfortable, glancing between their parents and me. "I think," I said, reaching for the envelopes at the center of the coffee table, "that it's time we all got on the same page about what's really been happening." I distributed the envelopes to each person. Please, open these and review the contents. Take your time. For several minutes, the only sound was the rustle of papers and occasional sharp intakes of breath. James and Melissa's faces grew increasingly pale as they read through the evidence I had compiled, the documentation of the tampered medication, the records of James's unauthorized meetings, the legal consultations about guardianship, the real estate inquiries for my home, the assisted living brochures. Harold, Michael spoke first, his attorney's composure slipping for perhaps the first time in our long association. This is one of the most comprehensive cases of attempted elder abuse and financial exploitation I've ever seen. As your attorney, I strongly advise pursuing both civil and criminal charges. Dad, James finally spoke, his voice hardly more than a whisper. This isn't your misunderstanding. Am I misunderstanding this? I asked, pulling out my phone and playing an audio recording. Melissa's voice filled the room. Once we have guardianship, we can sell everything, the company, the house, liquidate the investments. We'll move him to Peaceful Pines. It's far enough away that his old friends won't bother visiting. James's voice followed, I don't know, Mel. Taking Dad's company from him, it's his life's work. It's our future, Melissa's voice insisted. Do you want to wait another 10 years for your inheritance while he runs the company into the ground? He's not the businessman he used to be. We're doing him a favor. I stopped the recording. The silence that followed was deafening. Tyler, my 14-year-old grandson, broke it with a choked sob. Dad? Is that true? Were you going to put Grandpa in a home and take his stuff? Emma, older and more composed, fixed her parents with a disgusted look I had never seen on her young face. How could you? After everything Grandpa's done for us? Kids, you don't understand, Melissa began, but Emma cut her off. I understand perfectly, she said coldly. You were going to drug my grandfather and steal from him. James seemed to crumple in on himself, decades of carefully maintained appearance falling away to reveal the desperate, grasping man beneath. Dad, please. We can explain. We were worried about you. After Mom died, you weren't the same. We thought. You thought I was a convenient target, I finished for him. A grieving old man who wouldn't notice as you stripped away everything he'd worked for. I stood up, suddenly feeling every one of my 68 years and yet somehow stronger than I had in months. I've made some decisions about my future, which was the stated purpose of this dinner. I nodded to Michael, who withdrew additional documents from his briefcase. First, I have removed James as my power of attorney and healthcare proxy. Linda will now serve in that capacity. Melissa gasped. James stared at the floor. Second, I have restructured my will and established irrevocable trusts for Emma and Tyler that neither of you can access, I continued, addressing James and Melissa. They will receive their inheritance directly when they turn 25, provided they complete college. Third, I have filed a police report regarding the medication tampering. Dr. Patel has provided his findings to the authorities. Melissa began to cry, mascara running down her cheeks. Not tears of remorse, I suspected, but of frustration that her plans had collapsed. Fourth, James, effective immediately, your employment with Mitchell Construction is terminated. You will receive a severance package as outlined by company policy, but you will have no further role in the business. Dad, you can't, James began, but I held up a hand. I can, and I have. The board has already approved the decision based on the evidence of your attempted corporate espionage. Finally, I said, my voice softening slightly as I looked at my grandchildren, I want Emma and Tyler to know that none of this is their fault, and my door will always be open to them. I hope they'll still want to visit their grandfather, despite what's happened here tonight. Emma stood up and walked over to me, wrapping her arms around my waist in a tight hug. Every weekend, she promised fiercely. Tyler joined her a moment later, his young face streaked with tears. James and Melissa sat in stunned silence, the full weight of their actions and the consequences finally sinking in. I think, I said quietly, that dinner is over. James, Melissa, I'll have my attorney contact you regarding next steps. As they gathered their things to leave, Melissa paused at the door, her composure somewhat recovered. You won't really press charges, she said, not quite a question. We're family. I looked at this woman who had planned to drug me, institutionalize me, and steal everything I'd worked for. This woman who had corrupted my son against me. This woman who had whispered, "Why believe a traumatized old man," when she thought I couldn't hear. Family, I replied, the word tasting bitter on my tongue, doesn't do what you tried to do to me. And yes, Melissa, I will absolutely press charges. Margaret would expect nothing less. They left without another word, the door closing behind them with a finality that echoed through the house. The others stayed longer. Linda helped me clear the uneaten dinner. Michael ensured all the documentation was properly filed. Dr. Patel checked my blood pressure, concerned about the stress of the evening. Tom and Steve offered wordless support, the kind that comes from decades of friendship. Emma and Tyler stayed the night, neither wanting to go home with their parents. Later, alone in my study, I poured a glass of the scotch Margaret and I had been saving for our 50th anniversary, a milestone we never reached. I raised it toward her photograph on my desk. I wish you were here, I told her. You would have seen through them from the beginning. I could almost hear her reply, you saw through them too, Harold. You just needed time. The legal proceedings that followed were painful but necessary. Melissa eventually pled guilty to medication tampering, receiving a suspended sentence in community service, less than she deserved, but enough to create a permanent record. James avoided criminal charges but was named in the civil suit I filed, which resulted in a public judgment against him. The story made local news, then spread to national outlets as a cautionary tale about elder abuse and family betrayal. I received letters from other seniors who had experienced similar situations, thanking me for fighting back, for showing that age didn't equal vulnerability. Mitchell Construction continued to thrive under my leadership, though I did eventually bring in a promising young executive as COO with the intention of transitioning leadership over several years. Not because I was incapable, but because Margaret had always told me there was more to life than work. It had just taken me a while to believe her. Emma and Tyler kept their promise to visit regularly. James and I established a strained, formal relationship centered mostly around coordinating their visits. Melissa I never spoke to again. Some betrayals cut too deep for forgiveness. 2 years after that fateful dinner, I stood at the site of our newest project, an affordable housing development for seniors that would bear Margaret's name. As I watched the concrete being poured for the foundation, I reflected on how structures are only as strong as what they're built upon. Buildings. Relationships. Lives. I had lost my son, but saved myself. Lost the family I thought I had, but discovered the strength I didn't know remained in me. At 70, I was starting a new chapter, one built on truth, painful as it was, rather than comfortable illusions. Why believe a traumatized old man? Melissa had whispered that night, never imagining I would prove exactly why they should have. Not because I was old. Not because I was grieving. But because I was right. And in the end, that truth had exploded in front of everyone, just as it always, eventually, must. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.